the high and mighty who make these deals. Hardworking people who go to areas that are hard to get to and slog it out with the natives.
Well, that's a good question, slogging it out with the natives. I mean, there is a cultural lack of awareness on the part of the Chinese when they go into Africa. And I think it's very important.
The Chinese government, perhaps.
Well, even the Chinese developers. Yeah. But I think there's another thing to keep in mind, that we talk about Africa as if it were a country. Mm-hmm. You know, Africa is 50-some-odd countries. Mm. And each of those countries, some of those countries are run fairly well, most of them are not. Mm. And so when the Chinese go into these countries, they're not particularly concerned with how the countries are run. They're concerned with how their investment plays out. And I think that talking about how many Chinese are in Africa doesn't help us to understand the dilemma that the continent's faced with a country like Africa, like China, who doesn't care at all about the development of Africa, other than how it relates to their balance of trade. And the balance of trade between Africa and China is very heavily against the Africans at this particular point.
The Chinese go into Africa like old school commodity traders did back in the 20s and 30s when the rag and bone industry turned into
But again, they're not the only ones. When we go to Eastern Congo, there's Canadian companies, there's American companies.
Yeah, but the Chinese are overwhelmingly there. And what I think is, you know, what's going to be the flashpoint? What's going to be the story coming out of this? We all read our friend Eric's stuff on this on Twitter and his blog. What's going to happen when the Chinese have to confront, you know, their first African strongman who's reviewing mineral contracts?
But it's already been the case in places like Zambia.
Yeah, well, when
they kicked out.
Yes,
they've taken over a coal mine there recently.
And as this continues, will Chinese troops be going in like French troops? I mean, these are legitimate questions.
Depends on how strong the man is.
Yeah. You know, right. but the Chinese control right now the bulk of the natural resource. I mean, read Eric Olander. You know, look him up, folks. Eric Olander. Eric covers this stuff almost on an hourly basis, and you read his stuff and you go away from it. Constanza Montana's coverage at Africa Review down in South Africa. You read this stuff.
All right. So you're saying it. By the way, it was supposed to be the host's big week to shine. But another story upstaged the BRICS summit at the opening. Take, for instance, the front page of The Citizen. You see at the bottom there, what they call in journalist parlance, below the fold, you have Zuma's wife toasting Chinese First Lady Peng Liyuan. But that's relegated to below the fold by a soldier's account of South Africa's presence in the Central African Republic. We were glorified guards during the coup that overthrew President François Bozize in the Central African Republic. 13 South Africans killed, the most since the end of apartheid. It suddenly threw the spotlight on a bilateral defense agreement that many hadn't really noticed.
We are truly proud of our soldiers. Just over 200 of them fought bandits numbering more than 1,000 people. They fought a high-tempo battle for 9 hours defending the South African military base.
Paul Taylor?
Well, it looks like what's been going on in the Central African Republic has in some ways been a proxy war between South Africa and France for influence and control over the mineral resources of this country. It's clear that the rebels who've taken over and formed the new government of the Central African Republic are supported by Chad. Chad is France's closest ally and partner in Mali. France has not, didn't lift a finger to help President Bozize. All they did was to go in and secure the airport and make sure that their own nationals were safe. And it does look like this has been a power play, which at the moment the South Africans have come out of rather wounded.
Before I get Michael Kirtley's reaction, the French foreign minister last Monday morning, just after we'd gotten news that President Bozize had been overthrown, reacting on French breakfast radio.
We are following events in the Central African Republic hour by hour. As you know, there's been an attack by a movement called Seleka. President Bozizé had promised to do a certain number of things. He didn't do them. He left the country.
Didn't do them, and now he's out.
Well, I think that, with all due respect, it's hard to see this totally as a power play. Let's not forget that that the new strongman, Jotodia, was also consul in Sudan. And a lot of the military vehicles that were used inside Seleka were directly from Sudan. It's also hard to see how this rebellion, which has lasted now for close to 5 years, with several of the same players, are directly or indirectly being encouraged by the French in the same regard as the South Africans are very interested in. Everybody's interested in the diamonds of the CAR. That's not a problem. But the Seleka are not easy people to deal with, and I think that you're going to see a lot of disruption within the Seleka groups, because it's called Seleka means alliance in the Songo language, and I feel that before this all settles down, I'm not sure that the French are going to have any more influence than they had before.
So when the new strongman in Bangui says we'd like the French to come and train the army, it's basically a backlash against the South Africans' close bilateral ties with his predecessor.
And I don't know if the South Africans were very tied to them through President Bozizé's top advisor, but I'm not sure that they would reject an overture from South Africa again. Central Africa is a really screwed up country. And let's not forget that the reason that it's screwed up is because the presidents of Central African Republic, at least since the fall of Bokassa, have been totally ineffectual in unifying the country.
What is striking maybe is that it's a coup without change. Actually, it's a government of national union. And I heard a very interesting report on RFI, Radio France Internationale, where the reporter was in the antechamber of the president, and he was saying that all the ministers and notables and civil servants were queuing to see the new president. And so he interviewed one minister saying, well, you know, it's time for Caterpillar right now in Central Africa, and it's time where the Caterpillar is becoming a butterfly. So the reporter was saying, so what does that mean exactly? Well, we're changing, and so they're now all belonging more or less to the same government. So it's a change without a change. It's a weird coup. It's a bit sad for the population.
Yeah, I don't see that it's a huge change.
It's a rebellion, not a revolution. And as far as this proxy war between South Africa and France, well, fiddle-dee-dee, Miss Scarlett. The Central African Republic, in particular, is not a country that right now needs troops trained by France or South Africa. It needs someone to come in with money, which France doesn't have and South Africa certainly doesn't have, to build roads that go into the interior.
Chinese.
There you go.
All right.
The East is red.
Finally, talk about shooting to stardom. The Planet this week discovered the amazing tale of 17-year-old Nick D'Alosio.
I still have to do chores, still get in trouble if I don't have my room tidy.
He still has to do chores, or so he says. There's a lot you can get away with when you've been the world's youngest ever entrepreneur to raise venture capital. He was 15. And now, at 17, $30 million the richer for selling to Yahoo an app called Sumly that automatically gives you the abridged version of a news story.
I created a company called Sumly. You tell it your interests and it shows you summarized content. But instead of just a headline, Sumly gives you 400 characters. That's more than a tweet, but less than a full article. It identifies key points that matter most and summarizes them for you in just a handful of sentences.
Gorgeous stuff.
Before you know it, you're learning more, you're learning faster, you're getting information that's more meaningful, more valuable, and you're staying smart.
Nick, are you suggesting that Sumly makes you smarter?
I'm not legally allowed to make such claims, no.
Extraordinary.
I still have to do chores, still get in trouble if I don't have my room tidy.
Craig Copetas.
Yeah, I'd like to see Stephen Fry get all that excited if he was summarizing Oscar Wilde or William Shakespeare. I doubt it. Technology goes on. I think this is the dumbing down of the public. the news business has already taken enough hits where everything is done through links and blogs. There's very little shoe leather involved. Most of these new age bloggers, as far as I'm concerned, are thieves. They're stealing from Reuters. They're stealing from, rewriting and putting in links.
Was Yahoo right to spend $30 million?
Well, I don't know. You can't stop technology. No. You can't stop it. It would be silly, I think, for any of us to sit here and argue that you can.
There's huge amounts of free information out there on the internet of different quality, and clearly one of the few worthwhile ways of adding value is by being able to aggregate that information, summarize it in a way that people can digest. As a journalist, I feel that the information that we provide is something which has value because you can trust it, because you can take it to the bank.
Precisely.
Which a lot of the stuff on the internet does not have. But of course, if somebody has some clever device for summarizing what we write too, then we're going to have to try and find a way of monetizing that.
Michael Kirtley?
I mean, I see that there's, on the one hand, there's the sort of philosophical issue that's involved, which we've been discussing, which is the question of how knowledge and how information is spread. I mean, I go back to an old E.E. Cummings play called Santa Claus, which made that dichotomy between information and knowledge. I don't think there's too much knowledge that's being spread through Sumley. However, there's also the technological question that's involved. And what I find extremely interesting is why the newspapers themselves haven't come up with a Sumley of sorts. There's the intelligence, there's the imagination, there certainly is the motivation. But there must not be the strategy there. Because if you have this kid, a 17-year-old kid, putting together an app, they could have hired that 17-year-old kid at some point to do the same thing.
Is Virginie Herz?
Well, I don't know. I'm very ambivalent with this story. I think it's at the same time very glamorous, but it made me feel... Well, when I read the story, I just discovered the expression net native. And for the first time of my life, I suddenly felt very old and very corny because I was not net native. And I was thinking, okay, there is really something going on that is changing all our perspectives.
Is our job safe? Is our job safe here?
I don't know, but I think we all belong to the older world.
Does it feel like any of our jobs are safe?
Can the world this week be summarized in 400 characters?
No, but the thing, what he says is that all media, all news and articles, and what he proposes is complementary. That there are summarizing the news, the information, but then if you want to know more and to have more nuance, nuance, you just can go back to the source. And he is saying that.
But they're selling it on somebody.
And he's 30.
This is so simple that a 3-year-old kid could understand it.
Yeah, and
so run out and get me a 3-year-old kid. I don't get a word of it.
He's $30 million the richer for it. Paul Taylor, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Michael Kirtley, Virginie Herz, Craig Copetas. Thank you for joining us here for The World This Week.